She stood at the edge of the cliff, wind screaming past her, and a newborn pressed her chest. He came for cattle, not salvation. But when their eyes met, both knew this wasn't where it would end. The wind roared like it wanted to tear the world clean apart. It came screaming off the ridge, howling through broken pine and over the jagged cliffside that dropped into nothing but clouds and dust. The ground here was raw, brittle with frost, littered with sharp rock and scattered pine needles that hadn't seen green in months. But none of it mattered to Evelyn Cade. Not the wind, not the cold, not the tremble in her knees as she stood at the edge of it all with a bundled infant pressed against her chest. Nothing reached her anymore. Not since the day she buried Silas. Not since the world stopped making sense. The baby, barely a month old, let out a thin cry, no louder than a whisper, as if the wind had stolen even his voice. Evelyn adjusted her arms, drawing him tighter against her chest. Her shawl flapped wild around her, dark hair pulling free in tangled strands across her pale face. Her boots slid half an inch forward, gravel tumbling down into the endless canyon below. And for a breathless second, nothing existed but her, the baby, and the edge. Then a voice called out, not loud, not commanding, just real, human, heavy with breath from the climb. Mom. Evelyn didn't turn. The voice came again, closer this time. I didn't mean to startle you, but you probably ought to step back from there. She closed her eyes. Of all the places, all the times, of all the people to witness this, why him? Why now? The footsteps crunched behind her. Slow, careful. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the way he wasn't sure if he should move closer or not. I was just passing through, he added, looking for a lost calf. Figured I'd cut across the ridge, save half a day. Didn't expect to find anyone up here. Evelyn said nothing. The man stopped 5 feet behind her. She still didn't look, but she could hear the shift in his weight, the rustle of his coat in the wind. Name's Coulter, he said. Coulter Hayes. I ranched down in the low valley, about a half-day's ride from here. More silence. Evelyn's breath came shallow now. The baby whimpered again. She rocked gently, though her legs shook with strain. You don't have to say anything, Coulter said, softer now. But if you're waiting for a sign, maybe me showing up's close enough. That broke her. Not into tears, not into some dramatic cry, but into stillness. Her body locked, her chin dropped a fraction, and her heels slid backward a single step from the edge. Not by choice, by instinct. The instinct to survive. The instinct to shield the child in her arms. Coulter saw it. He didn't speak right away. Just watched as her boots settled more firmly on solid ground. I lost someone too, he said quietly. Not a wife, not a child, but enough. Enough to know that sometimes you find yourself in places you never meant to be. Her voice came out cracked and low. You should go. Maybe, but I won't. Evelyn finally turned her head. Her face was hollow, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, cheeks wind-chafed, lips dry and raw. But there was a stubbornness in her jawline, a ghost of defiance. She stared at him like she expected him to flinch. He didn't. Why are you really here? She asked. Coulter stepped forward just once, enough to be within arm's reach. Because someone looked me in the eye once, when I was about ready to give up, and said, you ain't done yet. I didn't believe them then, but I believe them now. The baby let out a soft coo, a tiny sound that seemed to echo louder than thunder. Evelyn broke. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sobs, no collapse. Just a slow sagging of her knees as she dropped to the cold earth, curling around the child like a shield. She didn't cry. She just breathed, heavy and jagged and real. And Coulter, without a word, crouched beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't reach for the baby. He just sat there, letting the wind scream around them while they held still. Minutes passed. I don't have anywhere to go, she said eventually. You do now. She turned her head toward him, exhausted and incredulous. You don't even know me. I know enough. He stood, offered a hand. She didn't take it right away, but she didn't push it away either. I have a cabin, he said. Plenty of room. Just me and the dog. You don't have to stay long. Just long enough to breathe. The baby stirred. Evelyn looked down, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "What's his name?" Coulter asked gently. "Micah. That's a good name." She hesitated another beat, then took his hand. The climb down the ridge was brutal. The wind hadn't let up, and the trail was nothing more than slick rock and pine root. Coulter led the way, carving steps into the slope where needed, always glancing back to make sure she wasn't falling behind. Evelyn didn't speak again, just followed, step after step, as the edge grew smaller behind her and the valley widened ahead. By the time they reached the horse tethered at the bottom of the hill, her arms were trembling with exhaustion. Coulter didn't offer to take Micah, just untied the mare, patted her neck, and helped Evelyn into the saddle. "I'll walk," he said. "It ain't far." The ride was quiet, the trail narrow, but as the shadows lengthened and the sky turned bruised and coppery, the cabin came into view. It wasn't much, weather-worn timber, a sagging porch, smoke curling faint from the chimney. But it was warm, alive. Evelyn didn't realize how long she'd been holding her breath until she stepped through the door. Inside smelled like cedar and dust and something cooking low on the hearth. The room was small but neat. A table with 2 chairs, a cot in the corner, a rocking chair, a Bible left open on the shelf. The dog, an old mutt with one eye and a lazy tail, rose, sniffed Evelyn, then curled up again by the fire. Coulter set out blankets without a word, put a kettle on, set bread on a plate. Evelyn sat in the rocking chair, held Micah against her chest. For the first time since Silas's death, she didn't feel the press of silence in her ears. "You don't have to talk about it," Coulter said after a while, sitting at the table. "But I'll listen if you want." She didn't answer, not at first, but then, slowly she spoke. "Silas was a good man, hardworking, stubborn, loved Micah before he was even born. We came out west because he wanted land. Said we'd carve our lives into the dirt if we had to." She paused. "He never even saw Micah's face. Took a fall off a latter 2 days before I gave birth. He was gone before I even screamed." Coulter didn't move. "I tried," she whispered. "I tried so hard. But the house was too quiet. The neighbors stopped coming. Food ran low. I look at the baby and feel like I wasn't enough, like I'd already failed." She closed her eyes. "I wasn't going to drop him," she said fiercely. "Never him. Just me." Coulter's voice was soft. "I know." That night, Evelyn slept by the fire. Micah curled against her chest. Coulter didn't ask for explanations. He didn't ask anything. Just kept the fire stoked, the door locked, and the night as safe as he could make it. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. And something else. Laughter. It was faint, coming from outside. She rose, carried Micah to the window. 2 children, not hers, playing in the snow near the barn. Coulter stood nearby, tossing them a stick, watching them with a quiet smile. Evelyn opened the door. "You didn't say you had company," she said, surprised. "I don't," Coulter replied. "Not really. They show up from time to time. No homes, no names worth keeping. But they always find their way here." She stepped onto the porch. "You take them in? I do what I can." Micah stirred in her arms. Evelyn looked down at him, then back up at Coulter. "You think I could help?" He nodded. "I think you already have." Evelyn Cade didn't know what lay ahead. The road was still hard. The pain hadn't vanished, but she was no longer on the edge, and that made all the difference. The snow had melted into soft mud by mid-morning, and the children, those 2 boys Evelyn had seen from the window, were now stomping through puddles in oversized boots, their laughter echoing around the valley like it had business being there. Evelyn watched them from the porch. Micah nestled close in a sling made from an old flour sack Coulter had helped her stitch the night before. The baby was asleep, one tiny fist curled beneath his chin. The quiet in her chest didn't ache as much as it used to. Coulter emerged from the barn with an armload of chopped wood and a dog trailing at his heels. The boys scattered when he barked something about fence mending, but their grins said they didn't take him too seriously. Evelyn couldn't help but smile watching them disappear over the hill. "You feed him?" she asked, glancing at the empty bowls on the porch. "Always," he replied, setting the wood by the door. "They never ask, but they don't refuse either." "Where they come from?" Coulter shrugged. One showed up 2 winters ago. The other came a month later. They stayed because nobody asked them to leave. Evelyn brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear. You never thought to send them back? To what? Coulter said simply. Hunger? Beatings? Some things you don't get sent back to. You build from what's left. The words sat heavy between them. Not unkind, just true. Inside, the fire crackled and the kettle hissed. Evelyn stepped in and poured hot water over dried chamomile and pine needles. She hadn't had proper tea since Silas died, but this tasted close enough to comfort. Micah stirred, fussing slightly, and Coulter handed her a tin of powdered milk. Traded for that last time I went into town. Ain't mother's milk, but it fills the belly. She accepted it without speaking, too tired for pride. Too grateful for judgment not to matter. By noon, the sky darkened fast. Storm clouds rolled low, and the wind shifted from damp to sharp. Evelyn stood at the window watching the hills disappear behind sheets of rain. She didn't like it. The way the air changed. The way the light tilted wrong. Coulter noticed too. Something's coming. Before Evelyn could ask what, a rider appeared at the far end of the trail, galloping hard, coat flapping behind him like wings. One of the boys. She thought his name was Eli, ran from the field, waving his arms. Coulter was out the door before the rider even dismounted. Colt, the man called. You got room for one more? The stranger slid off his horse, cradling something bundled in a soaked quilt. A girl, maybe 7. Thin, shaking, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Found her alone near Dead Man's Creek, the man said, his chest heaving. Said her folks drowned trying to cross the river. She was clinging to the reeds. Coulter didn't waste time. Get her inside. Evelyn moved instinctively, clearing space near the hearth, laying out blankets warmed by the coals. The girl didn't speak, didn't cry. She just stared at the flames with the wide, hollow eyes of someone who'd seen too much too fast. Name? Evelyn asked gently. The girl blinked, then mouthed something too soft to hear. Eli crouched beside her. Her name's Sadie, he said, as if it were fact. The name stuck. Evelyn wrapped Micah tighter against her and stood back, watching as Coulter moved through the cabin with purpose. He stripped the girl's wet clothes, bundled her in a dry shirt, and set her near the fire without ever once looking overwhelmed. How many children have you done this for? Evelyn asked when the room had quieted again. Coulter didn't look up from stoking the coals. Enough to stop counting. Not enough to stop hoping. What? He sat back on his heels, rubbing his palms together. Because someone needs to. The storm broke hard that night. Rain pounded the roof like fists. Wind shook the windows until they whined. Evelyn barely slept. She rocked Micah near the fire, while Sadie slept curled like a pup beneath the dog's paw. Eli and his brother, Sam, she'd finally learned, shared the cot, legs tangled, breaths loud and even. Coulter sat near the door, rifle across his lap. Just in case. You think someone's coming? Evelyn asked. Storms always draw things in, he replied. Cold. Desperation. Desperation's loud. Evelyn nodded. She understood that kind of noise. The kind you couldn't hear with your ears, only your soul. By morning, the trail was gone, washed out into sludge and rocks. Trees down. The barn roof torn halfway off. Coulter cursed under his breath, not at the damage, but at what it might bring. When the land breaks, people wander, and not everyone's looking for shelter. Evelyn didn't have to ask what he meant. They spent the day patching the barn, hauling water, mending what they could. Sadie didn't speak, but she followed Evelyn like a shadow, copying her motions exactly, folding laundry, wiping counters, tending the fire. She's watching you, Coulter said that evening. Evelyn glanced down to find Sadie holding a piece of cloth the same way she was, face scrunched in concentration. She's trying to remember what safe feels like, Coulter added. Don't let her forget. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep again. Too many memories crawling up her spine. Micah coughed in his sleep, dry, short gasps, and she held him tighter, rocking gently. She didn't notice Coulter watching her from the table. You ever going back? He asked softly. She didn't answer for a long time. Back to what? He nodded, accepting the truth in her voice. You? Coulter looked into the fire. Never had much behind me, he said. My family's been bones in the ground longer than I've had a name worth carrying. I stay because someone has to, not because I think I'll be remembered. You will, she said quietly. I'll remember. Their eyes met. Nothing more needed saying. The next morning brought something they hadn't expected. Footprints. Not the kids. Not Coulter's. Heavy. Deep. Winding from the north trail toward the barn, and then back again. Whoever had come close. Had circled. Had left. Scouting, Coulter muttered, crouching beside the print. Won't be long now. Bandits? Maybe. Or worse. Men with law in their mouth and greed in their gut. What do we do? He stood. We get ready. That day, they moved the children inside. Boarded windows. Readied food. Coulter taught Eli and Sam how to load a rifle. Not to shoot, just to understand it. Sadie stayed beside Evelyn, eyes wide. And still, the tracks came back that night. Closer. Coulter didn't sleep. He stood on the porch, lantern low, rifle ready. Evelyn sat beside him. You think they'll come tomorrow? I think they'll come when they think we're weakest. She rocked Micah, who whimpered and pressed his face in her chest. I don't want him to grow up in fear. He won't, Coulter said. Not while you're breathing. She looked at him. And you? I made peace with fear a long time ago. Then morning came. And with it, horsemen. 4 of them. Moving slow. Confident. Evelyn handed Micah to Sadie. Stay inside. Don't open the door unless it's me or him. She stepped onto the porch beside Coulter. The men didn't raise weapons. Not yet. But their smiles were too smooth and their coats too clean for wanderers. Fine little homestead you've got here, the tallest said, tipping his hat. Lot of mouths to feed. We get by, Coulter said evenly. See, that's the thing, the man continued. You got all these kids and no papers saying they're yours. Looks an awful lot like kidnapping to some. Evelyn's blood turned cold. You here on behalf of the law? She asked. The man smiled wider. We're here on behalf of interest. Let's just say there's folks who make good money moving orphans. Coulter didn't flinch. Turn around, he said. The man's grin faded. You really think you can stop us? No, Coulter said. But I won't have to. You don't belong here. And this land knows it. The wind picked up. Trees groaned. Clouds rolled low again. The leader leaned forward. You're going to regret. The crack of the rifle was deafening. Coulter didn't shoot, but he'd fired into the sky. A warning. The men paused. Then another rifle cocked behind them. Eli, on the roof, holding the second rifle Coulter had hidden. Now, Coulter said, voice like gravel, get off my land, and don't come back. This time they did. Not because of the guns, but because of something else in Coulter's voice. Something final. The cabin was quiet for hours afterward. Then Sadie whispered, Are they gone? Evelyn nodded. For now. But she knew more would come, which meant she had to be ready. Not just to protect Micah, but to protect them all. Dawn didn't come gentle. It bled across the valley like a wound, dark red and trembling through clouds still thick from the storm. The air smelled of mud, wet timber, and distant smoke. Not from the hearth, but from something burning farther than the eye could see. Evelyn stood at the edge of the porch, Micah against her chest, while Coulter saddled the mare beside the barn. The children were inside still, curled into each other like pups, the dog snoring beneath the cot. It was peaceful in that fragile way, where even quiet feels like it's waiting for something to shatter it. They'll be back, Evelyn said, not as a question but a truth. Coulter didn't look at her, just tightened the cinch on the saddle. Yeah. You think next time they'll ask? No. She swallowed, fingers tightening around Micah's tiny back. The boy let out a soft sigh and burrowed closer, unfazed by the weight of the world crashing around them. Coulter finally turned, voice low. If you want to leave, now's the time. Head east. I'll pack what you need. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. And do what? Run until there's nowhere left? Hide Micah under floorboards? I didn't come off that cliff just to start crawling again. Coulter's eyes flicked to hers, searching. Testing. Then we hold. And if we can't, then we fall standing. The words settled in her bones. They spent the rest of that day preparing. Not with panic, but with purpose. Coulter dug out every rifle he owned, none newer than a decade, but all cared for. He taught Evelyn how to check the chamber, how to reload with shaking fingers, how to brace it so the kick didn't bruise her shoulder too hard. She didn't ask questions, didn't flinch. She listened like a woman who had already lost too much to gamble what little remained. Eli and Sam helped reinforce the barn, dragging beams across the entrance and filling the gaps between planks with burlap sacks soaked in mud. Evelyn watched the way they moved, not like children anymore, but like boys who had seen the world turn mean and had chosen not to blink. Sadie never strayed far from Micah. She carried the baby as if she were born to it, swaying gently even when the wind picked up again. Her voice never rose above a whisper, but she sang old hymns Evelyn half remembered from childhood, soft as breath, broken as hope. By nightfall, the cabin had changed. It no longer looked like a home. It looked like a place bracing for a siege. Coulter set one of the rifles on the table, next to 2 boxes of shells. They'll wait for dark. Men like that always do. Evelyn nodded, eyes fixed on the flickering shadows across the wall. They think we're weak, Coulter added. Because we got children. Because we care. They're wrong. Yeah, but we'll have to prove it. The hours stretched slow. Evelyn fed the children, warmed broth for Micah, swept the floor even though there was no dirt left to sweep. Movement kept her steady. Stillness brought fear too close. Coulter stood at the door with a rifle across his arms, watching the tree line. Waiting. It was Sam who saw the first torch, a small flicker of orange, moving slow between the trees. Then another, and another. They're here, he said, voice flat. Coulter took position on the porch. Evelyn joined him, rifle in her hands, heart pounding against her ribs like it wanted out. 6 riders this time, all mounted, all armed. The leader, the same man as before, sat tall in his saddle, torch held high. He smiled when he saw Coulter. Didn't think we'd let this go, did you? Coulter didn't answer. The man clicked his tongue, amused. See, we don't like when people don't listen. Especially not some backwoods rancher and a woman with too much pride. Evelyn stepped forward. If you come near these children, I swear I will. What? The man interrupted, grinning. Shoot me? Raise that boy to think killing fixes the world. She didn't answer. He chuckled, gestured to the others. Take the kids. Burn the rest. And then chaos. Evelyn didn't see the first shot. Only heard it crack through the dark. One of the horses reared, screaming, as its rider slumped sideways into the mud. The torch dropped, smothered in wet earth. Eli, crouched behind the chicken coop, had fired first. Coulter raised his rifle and took down the second man before he reached the porch. The third galloped wide, circling toward the barn, tried to flank. Evelyn fired and missed. But the sound was enough. The horse spooked. The rider swerved, lost control, crashed into the fence post. Screams, gunfire, hooves thrashing, then quiet. 2 riders turned and fled without orders, disappeared into the trees, their torches swallowed by the dark. The leader, now alone, stared at the bodies in the yard, breathing hard. You think this changes anything? He snarled. You're still alone. Coulter stepped down the porch, rifle low but steady. No, he said. We're not. And from the barn, from the field, from the shadows, they appeared, other boys. Girls. Faces Evelyn hadn't seen before. A dozen maybe more. Older, some no more than children. Dirty, ragged, silent, holding pitchforks, hatchets, whatever tools they could carry. Children Coulter had taken in over the years. Children who had never left. The man stared at them all, at this strange, cobbled-together army, and something shifted in his face. Not fear, recognition. He kicked his horse and turned. Evelyn didn't fire. She didn't have to. He wasn't coming back. They buried the dead at sunrise. 2 of Coulter's old mules had taken bullets in the crossfire. The kids helped dig, heads bowed, hands blistered. They didn't cry. Not then. Evelyn did. Not loud. Not broken. Just enough to know she was still alive. That night, after the children were safe in bed and the fires burned low, Coulter sat on the porch with Micah in his lap. He looked so out of place holding the baby. Rough hands, scarred knuckles, that forever tired look in his eyes. But he held him gently, like something he'd never earned but would never let go. He'll be strong, Coulter said quietly. Because you were. Evelyn sat beside him, watching the stars blink through the smoke-stained sky. He'll be kind, she replied. Because you are. Neither said more. They didn't need to. But days passed. The children stayed. All of them. Word must have spread. Whatever story people whispered about the cliffside widow and the rancher who never turned kids away. More came. Siblings. Orphans. Boys with knives and girls with scars. They trickled in like rivers, finding their source. Evelyn took to calling roll at breakfast. Sadie became her right hand. Micah never left her hip. Sam built a bunk in the barn. Eli ran messages into town. And Coulter? He said less, but he smiled more. Until the day Micah, barely walking, pointed up at him from the porch, arms raised, eyes bright. "Papa," he said. It was a whisper, a babble, maybe a mistake, but it hit like lightning. Coulter froze. Evelyn turned slowly. The porch stilled. "Say again," Coulter whispered. Micah grinned and raised his arms higher. "Papa." Coulter bent down, picked him up. The baby patted his beard and giggled. The dog barked. And the whole porch, every child, every worn soul, cheered. Evelyn wiped her face, not because of the dust, but because that was the moment she knew. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was family. The word stuck, not like a wound. No, it lodged in the chest like an ember in dry wood. "Papa." From that moment forward, the children didn't ask who Coulter was, didn't whisper about whether he'd send them away, didn't wonder if this place was just another stop in a life full of walking. They decided, and in their decision, something shifted. The ranch wasn't just a safe stop now. It became home. Evelyn saw it first in the small ways. Sam left his boots by the door at night instead of under the porch. Eli took to fixing the loose hinge on the barn without being asked. Sadie started brushing her hair each morning before breakfast. And Micah, barely walking, clung to Coulter's pant leg like it was his birthright. The quiet changed, too. It was no longer that tense silence of fear, but the soft hum of routine. Spoons scraping tin bowls, hammers knocking wood, laughter between chores. Evelyn had known homes before, but not like this. Not stitched together from broken pieces, not grown from the ashes of so much sorrow. It made her ache with something warm and terrifying all at once. Coulter didn't speak much about the word. Not the day Micah first said it. Not in the week that followed as the children adopted it like air. But Evelyn noticed how he started holding the baby longer at night. How he'd pause before walking through a room full of sleeping boys and girls, just long enough to count the breaths. He wore the name like he wore everything else, with quiet resolve and the weight of responsibility it deserved. But nothing good stays untouched. Not in the West. It began with the telegram. Eli returned from town with a folded paper, eyes dark. He handed it to Coulter without a word. Evelyn watched from across the porch as the man she'd come to trust unfolded the thin slip and read it once. Then again, she didn't like the way his jaw tightened. "Something wrong?" she asked. He didn't answer at first, just handed her the telegram. Territory Land Registry claim dispute filed for South Ridge property investigator Ian Rout. Her stomach dropped. "I thought this land was yours." "It is," Coulter said low. "Has been for 18 years. Before that, my father's. Before that, my grandfather's." "Then what is this?" He folded the paper slowly. "Someone's trying to say otherwise." The next day brought the man in the gray coat. He arrived not on horseback, but in a covered buggy drawn by a glossy bay mare, the kind too clean for frontier dirt. He stepped down wearing polished boots and a silver pocket watch, and introduced himself with a card. Silas T., Merrick Land Investigator. U.S. Territory Commission. Coulter didn't offer to shake his hand. "I've been sent to verify claim legitimacy," the man said, tone clipped and formal. "There's concern that the property, particularly the acreage past the South Ridge, was never properly recorded. It was," Coulter said simply. "I'll need to see the original deed." Coulter didn't move. "My father died in that barn. My mother under that tree yonder. You think I stayed through drought and fire and bandits because I like the scenery?" The man adjusted his collar. Emotions don't change ownership, sir. Evelyn stepped beside Coulter. Neither does greed. Silas looked at her, then at the children gathering in the doorway. His eyes narrowed just slightly. You're housing quite a few here. They're mine, Coulter said. By blood? No, he replied. By choice. The man didn't argue, just nodded stiffly. I'll begin my inspection. For 2 days, he roamed the land, measuring, scribbling notes, peeking inside the barn, the shed, even the chicken coop. The children scattered when he came near, eyes wary. On the 3rd day, he returned to the porch with a tight smile. There's a complication, he said. Coulter crossed his arms. Of course there is. Seems a man named Brent Rourke has filed claim to the ridge. Claims his great-uncle laid stake long before your kin settled here. Says he's got paperwork, charters from the old Republic days. He's lying. Be that as it may, Silas replied. He's powerful. He owns half the valley east of here. He'll come for it, legal or not. What are you telling me? That unless you can produce your father's deed or a registered charter, your claim's vulnerable. Evelyn's heart thundered. You can't just take his land. I don't take anything, Silas said. The law does. That night, Evelyn sat beside Coulter on the porch. The children were inside, warm, safe, unaware. But the weight of the world had found them again. You have the deed? She asked quietly. No, he said. It burned during the barn fire. Everything but this place and my hands burned that day. She didn't speak. There wasn't comfort in lies. What'll happen if he wins? Coulter's voice was distant. We'll be forced off. The kids will be split. Some sent to town orphanages. Some worse. Not if I can help it, Evelyn said fiercely. Coulter didn't smile. Just leaned forward, elbows on knees. I can fight a fire, he said. I can fight wolves, bandits, winter. But this? Paper men with pens and stamps. We'll find another way, she said. He turned to her, eyes soft. Even if we did, they'll come from Micah first. He's not registered to you. No father's name. They'll say you found him. Say you're unstable. They'll say what they want. Evelyn snapped. Let them. He's mine. Silas returned the next day with a rider beside him. Brent Rourke. Tall, clean-shaven, dressed like a man who never worked a day in dirt, but owned plenty of men who did. He dismounted slowly, surveying the homestead like it was already his. Shame, he said, glancing toward the barn. Could have been a fine spread, if it weren't squatting on someone else's claim. Coulter didn't move. You've never set foot here until today, he said. Your uncle never laid claim. My family bled for this land. Brent smiled, and now I own it. That's how it works. Evelyn stepped forward. You want land? Take the swamp north of the ridge. Nobody wants that. Brent chuckled. Oh, I don't want the land. Then what? He looked past them, at the porch full of children, at Sadie holding Micah, at Eli sharpening fence wire. I want to see what happens when something built on hope burns. Coulter's fist tightened. You'll have to come through me. Brent nodded. That's the plan. He and Silas left, but the echo of his words lingered long after. That night, Evelyn sat by the hearth with Sadie. Micah was asleep against her shoulder. Will he take us? The girl asked softly. No, Evelyn said. He'll try, but we won't let him. The next day, Coulter made a decision. If we can't find the deed, he said, we find proof another way. What do you mean? Eli asked. We go to church records. My parents married here, registered their land there. The priest, Father Ingram, he might still be alive. Where's the church? Evelyn asked. Coulter looked toward the mountains. 40 miles north. Past Ash Hollow. That's a 2-day ride. Less if we cut through Crooked Pass. Evelyn's brow furrowed. That pass is dangerous. Everything else is more dangerous. He turned to the boys. You stay here. Guard the ranch. You've seen what needs protecting. To Evelyn, he said, I need you with me. She blinked. Me? You're the strongest one here. And I'll need someone to watch my back if we're ambushed. Or worse. Evelyn didn't hesitate. They left at dawn. Coulter rode ahead. Evelyn followed with Micah nestled tight. The road was rough, the wind sharp, and the threat of eyes in the trees never faded. But they didn't stop. They crossed Bitter Creek by midday, camped under a canopy of pine that night. Micah whimpered in his sleep, and Evelyn sang the same imsade he used. Her voice cracked, but it steadied him. In the dark, Coulter stared at the stars. "Do you ever wish," he asked, "that you jumped?" She didn't answer right away. "Then some days. But not today." He nodded. The next morning, they reached the ruins of the old mission. Fire had taken most of it, ash and stone, but the bell tower still stood, and in the basement beneath the floorboards they found him. Father Ingram. Old. Bent. Nearly blind, but alive. "Coulter Haynes," he said. "I'd know that voice anywhere." They explained everything. Quickly, urgently. The priest listened, then smiled. "I remember your father," he said. "Stubborn mule, but honest." He shuffled to a lockbox, pulled a thick ledger. Dust flew. He turned pages with trembling fingers. And there, on page 237, Coulter Haynes Sr. and Lorna Haynes. Property recorded. Map included. Signed. Sealed. "I'll notarize it again," Father Ingram said. "But it won't matter unless you get it to the judge." "Where's he?" Evelyn asked. "Clearwater Junction. Another 60 miles. They rode out before noon. And behind them, high on the ridge, 2 riders watched them leave. Brent's men, ready to strike. The first bullet missed. It sang through the pines with a scream like a wasp, fast, close, angry, and buried itself in a tree trunk just inches from Evelyn's head. She ducked instinctively, pulling Micah tighter against her chest as the horse reared. Coulter spun in his saddle, eyes narrowing, rifle already in hand before his mouth could even form the warning. "Down," he barked. Evelyn didn't need to be told twice. She slid off her saddle and rolled beneath the nearest brush, shielding the baby with her arms as 2 more shots cracked through the air. Coulter dismounted hard, using his horse's flank as cover, returning fire in sharp, efficient bursts. He wasn't shooting to scare. He was shooting to kill. The shadows moved on the ridge above. 2 riders at least, maybe 3, crouched low against the saddle as they tried to flank. Coulter saw the tactic for what it was. They weren't hired guns. They were wolves circling a weakened buck, thinking the kill was already theirs. But he'd been hunted before, and he'd learned long ago that a cornered man with a purpose could be deadlier than any outlaw. He took one down with a shot to the chest. The second veered off, but came around the other side, trying to cut them off before the pass. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She grabbed the pistol from her saddlebag and fired 3 times, wildly, but the third found its mark. The rider tumbled off his horse with a sharp cry, the animal bolting into the woods. Then silence. Coulter waited, rifle aimed, body still. No more movement. No more shots. He finally straightened, his breath heavy in the cold morning air. Evelyn slowly crawled from cover, hair matted with dirt, Micah still pressed tight against her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "You? I've had worse mornings." He walked to the body she'd shot, checking for signs of life. There were none. She watched him kneel and search the man's pockets. When he stood again, he held a scrap of paper. His brow furrowed. "What is it?" she asked. "Map," he said, "of our route. Mark." Her stomach turned. "They planned this." He nodded. "They knew we'd come." Evelyn looked toward the east, where Clearwater Junction lay miles ahead. "Then we need to move faster." They buried the bodies quickly. No prayers, no names, just 2 piles of rock over shallow graves, and the lingering scent of blood in the air. The horses were spooked but obedient. Within an hour, they were back on the trail, pushing harder now, urgency thick in their throats. The sun burned high by noon, but the cold clung to their skin. Evelyn rocked Micah gently, humming, even as her eyes scanned every ridge and shadow. Coulter didn't speak. He rode like a man with a war burning behind his eyes, silent, focused, and terrifying in his resolve. By evening, they reached Clearwater. The town was small but busy, smokestacks rising from chimneys, a blacksmith pounding metal behind the general store, children chasing each other through alleys. Normalcy. But Evelyn had learned not to trust the surface of things. Peace could be a mask, worn best by places ready to cut deep. They tied their horses near the courthouse and walked in without delay. The clerk at the front desk looked up, startled. Can I help? We need to see the judge, Coulter said. Do you have an appointment? No, Evelyn replied, stepping forward, but we've got proof. The clerk hesitated, then motioned towards stairwell. Second floor. Office at the end. They climbed fast. Judge Morris was older than expected, with wire-rimmed glasses and a scowl that seemed permanent. He didn't stand when they entered, just eyed them over his papers. You the ones claiming the Haynes property dispute? Coulter nodded. Yes, sir. We brought the original record. From the church. Signed and sealed. The judge reached for the document slowly, eyes scanning the pages. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, this is good. Relief crashed over Evelyn like a wave. But the judge added, and the word was a hammer. You'll need a sworn affidavit from the priest. We've had false records before. I need his word. Coulter's jaw flexed. He's almost blind. He can't travel. Then you'll need to bring me something else. A witness. A signature. Something airtight. We don't have time, Evelyn said, voice rising. They're already trying to run us off that land. We've got children there, orphans. If we don't get back soon, it might be too late. The judge looked at her, tired. And I've got protocol. Coulter stepped forward. Then we make it official. How? Coulter pulled a folded paper from his coat. My own affidavit. Sworn under oath. If I'm lying, you can hang me. The judge blinked. You'd risk that. Coulter looked him dead in the eye. I already am. The room went still. Then, slowly, the judge nodded. Give me the document. I'll stamp it. An hour later, they rode out of town with a fresh deed. Official. Recognized. Legal. But they were still too late. Smoke. It met them 3 miles out, rising in thick black columns from the south. Not wood smoke from the chimney. No, this was acrid and oily. Bon smoke. Fence-post smoke. Evelyn's horse broke into a gallop. Coulter followed, heart in his throat. The ranch was under siege. Brent Rourke hadn't waited for the law. He'd brought his men, lit fire to the fields, and started taking what he claimed was his. The barn blazed in the distance. Children ran from shed to trough with buckets, forming a desperate chain to douse the flames. Sam had a burn across his cheek. Eli limped, favoring one leg. Sadie held Micah in the shadows, crying. Coulter didn't think. He fired a warning shot in the air as he galloped into the clearing. Get off my land. Rourke turned, surprised to see them alive. He smirked. Thought you'd be dead by now. Evelyn dismounted, shoving the deed into his chest. This land is his. Official. Sealed. You got no right. Rourke didn't even look at it. Just dropped it into the mud. I don't care what some paper says. You will, Coulter growled, raising his rifle. But Rourke didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for Micah. Coulter fired. The bullet tore through Rourke's shoulder, spinning him back. The man screamed and dropped to the ground, blood soaking his fine coat. His men turned to run. No loyalty among hired wolves when their alpha was bleeding. The fire still burned, but the wind shifted. The barn was lost, but the cabin was untouched. The children were shaken, but alive. And Coulter, breathing hard, gun still smoking, stood with Evelyn beside him. They had won, but the cost still had to be counted. They'd buried the animals lost in the fire, tended to Eli's leg, bending some isbros. Micah slept soundly for once, tucked in a cradle Sadie had built from scrap. And that night, as Evelyn stitched the torn deed back together with trembling fingers, she looked at Coulter across the fire and said, They'll come again. He nodded. They always do, but we'll be ready. He didn't answer, just took Micah into his arms and rocked him gently. Outside, the stars returned. Inside, the light stayed on, because this place, this fractured, stitched-together home, was no longer waiting for peace. It was building it. The flames had died, but the scent lingered like something unwilling to leave, a reminder in ash that nothing stayed untouched forever. Coulter stood near the smoldering wreckage of the barn long after the others had gone in. His hands were blackened, the calloused palms now streaked with soot and blood, knuckles raw from swinging buckets and pulling half-burnt beams off the ground with nothing but his own fury to drive him. The barn was gone. Everything inside, tools, hay feed stores for winter, devoured by flame. But the cabin still stood, and the children were alive, and Evelyn was there beside him when the firelight faded into dawn. They didn't speak much that morning. There was too much to do. Coulter set to rebuilding with a focus like stone, starting with what mattered most. Fences to keep the remaining cattle from wandering, a makeshift lean-to for sheltering supplies, and a new store ledger to take account of what was left. Evelyn and the children worked alongside him, not because they were told, but because that's what a family does when the world tries to burn them out. They rebuild. The ground was harder now, not just the soil, but the trust beneath it. Every sound in the woods felt like a new threat. Every knock on the door twisted the stomach. And it wasn't just Brent Rourke they feared anymore. It was the idea of him. The truth that there would always be another man like him. Another paper chaser with a hunger for land and no regard for what it cost. That knowledge hung heavy over them like an unspoken prophecy. By week's end, the ranch bore scars, but it stood. The wind no longer smelled of smoke. The children were quieter, yes, but not broken. Sam had taken to guarding the property line with Coulter's spare rifle slung too large over his back. Sadie spent her hours with Micah nestled against her hip, whispering lullabies half forgotten from Evelyn's childhood. Eli, despite the limp, dug a fresh well trench by himself, determined that water never be a weakness again. Coulter watched them with a kind of awe he didn't show on his face. These weren't just survivors, they were builders, menders, carriers of weight beyond their years. And he realized something simple, something that had rooted itself silently in the marrow of his bones. He would die for these children, without question, without pause. One evening, as the sky blushed pink with the promise of another cold night, Evelyn joined him by the fence. Her hands were red from hauling water, and there was a streak of flour on her cheek she hadn't noticed. "They're healing," she said, nodding toward the children gathered by the fire. He glanced that way, then looked out over the field. "They shouldn't have to, but they are," she replied. "Because of you." Coulter didn't answer. Instead, he took a deep breath and leaned his elbows on the fence rail. "We got a letter today." She turned sharply. "From who?" "The judge. Sealed and marked. Says Brent Rourke's claim has been revoked. Land is officially ours." Evelyn's shoulders sagged. "Then it's over? For now." She didn't smile. Not really. Just let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for weeks. "What happens next?" Coulter looked at her, then toward the children again. "We stay. We build. We keep going." And they did. Through the days that followed, the rhythm returned. Not the same as before, but steadier, deeper. Coulter carved out new fence posts with Eli at his side, teaching him how to align the grain with each swing. Evelyn reworked the kitchen garden, moving the herbs closer to the cabin in case of another attack. Sam began collecting books, tattered, donated volumes from Clearwater Junction's church hall, and read aloud to the others at night, his voice uncertain but growing stronger each evening. Sadie started keeping a diary. Just a little book of thoughts, but Coulter caught her smiling while she wrote, and that alone made his chest ache in a way he didn't fully understand. Micah learned to walk properly on the porch. His steps were clumsy, but each one steadier than the last. Every time he fell, someone, Sadie, Evelyn, even Eli, was there to catch him. And each time, he rose again, arms out, eyes wide with trust. It was the kind of trust that could either save his soul or shatter it. Coulter prayed it would be the first. Winter deepened. The snows came heavier now, slower, settling thick on the roof and fence rails. Evelyn worried about food, but Coulter had already made plans. Hidden stores, traps near the forest edge, deals made with a quiet, one-eyed trader from the next valley over. They wouldn't starve. Not this time. But food wasn't the only thing that stalked them. One afternoon, as Coulter chopped firewood near the tree line, he heard something, a branch crack not from wind, but from weight. He paused, hand tightening on the axe handle. The forest was still, too still. Then a voice. "Didn't expect you'd make it out of Clearwater alive." Coulter turned slowly. Brent Rourke stepped from the trees, arm in a sling, eyes sharp despite the bruising. Coulter didn't flinch. "I should have shot you lower." Brent chuckled darkly. "You think it's over?" You think one deed from a crooked judge means anything? I've got men, money, time. You've got none of those here, Coulter said. Leave. Brent's smile faded. You don't understand. This was supposed to be mine. All of it. Then you're looking at the wrong land, Coulter growled. What's mine was earned. Paid for. Protected. And I won't let you touch it. You think they'll always be here? Brent asked, nodding toward the cabin. The woman. The brats. You think you can keep them safe forever? I'll die trying, Coulter said, stepping forward. Brent raised his good hand in mock surrender. Just remember, Coulter, some roots don't grow without blood. And with that, he vanished back into the woods. Coulter stood still for a long moment, jaw tight. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at the window, watching the tree lean, rifle across his knees. Evelyn found him there just before dawn, wrapped a quilt over his shoulders, and said nothing. She knew. She always seemed to know. Another week passed. The tension hung like fog, but no more threats came. Not yet. Christmas approached. Sam asked if they'd do anything special. Evelyn said yes before Coulter could answer. She and the children gathered pine boughs, decorated the mantel with dried berries and twisted ribbon from old dresses. They built stockings from burlap sacks, painted them with scraps of leftover dye. Eli carved wooden animals, one for each sibling. Sadie wrote a poem. Sam made a tree of branches nailed together, crooked but proud. Coulter wasn't a man for holidays. But when he saw Micah stumble toward that crooked tree with a lopsided smile and a carved pony in his hand, he felt something deep shift again. That night, Evelyn found him in the barn. She sat beside him, both of them watching the horses in silence. Do you ever think about the kind of man you used to be? She asked quietly. He nodded. Every day. And who are you now? He didn't answer for a long time. Then I don't know. But when he called me Papa, he paused, throat tight. I stopped wanting to be the man I was. Evelyn reached out and took his hand. You're not alone, she said. He looked at her, and this time he didn't look away. They returned to the cabin just before midnight. The fire was low, the children asleep, the night quiet and heavy with snow. Coulter walked over to the hearth and added another log, watching the sparks dance upward. Evelyn stepped beside him. They stood like that for a long time, just breathing, just listening. And when Micah stirred in his sleep and whispered, Papa, into the night, Coulter didn't cry. But Evelyn did, because she knew what it meant. Not just to him, but to all of them. They weren't waiting for a home anymore. They had one. The mornings came slower now, quieter. The wind moved gentle around the eaves, and the trees no longer whispered with fear. It wasn't that the danger had vanished. It hadn't. But something else had taken its place, something more resilient than any wall Coulter could have built. The children didn't flinch at shadows anymore. They slept deeply. They laughed often. They called the ranch home without hesitation. And each time Micah toddled into the room, chubby arms outstretched, babbling the word Papa, with joy etched into every syllable, Coulter felt something inside him mend where he hadn't even known it was broken. But peace like spring thaw came with a cost. Brent Rourke hadn't been seen since his warning in the woods. But Coulter knew that silence wasn't surrender, it was planning, waiting. And so he prepared, quietly, purposefully. He reinforced the cabin walls. Replaced the old hinges on the front door with iron he bought from Clearwater. Set traps around the far field. Every step was deliberate, not from panic but from certainty. Men like Brent didn't fade into the hills. They came back when you just begun to breathe again. Still, life pressed forward. Evelyn had begun to teach Sadie how to read properly. They spent hours at the kitchen table with torn books and stubby pencils, their heads bent close together. Evelyn's voice soft and patient as she corrected misread words and praised the effort, not just the result. Coulter watched from the porch more than once, pretending to carve fence pegs, but really just memorizing the sound of Sadie's giggle, how it rose freely now, not guarded like before. Eli's limp had improved, though the cold made it ache. He refused to stop working. One morning, Coulter found him trying to reset a broken hinge on the chicken coop with a hammer too heavy for his hand. The boy looked up, sheepish, expecting a scolding. Coulter only nodded and knelt beside him. Try holding it like this, he said, wrapping Eli's fingers around the grip properly. You'll save your thumb that way. From that moment on, Eli shadowed him like a second shadow. Not asking much, just learning, watching, becoming. Sam had taken the longest to thaw. For weeks, he moved like a soldier, guarding the family with the quiet ferocity of someone who'd already seen too much to trust the world again. But even he began to crack. Evelyn caught him one night at the edge of the barn, carving something into a beam. She walked over, not speaking, and saw what it was, a name. Their name, written in blocky letters across the wood. "Why there?" she asked. "So, but stays," he said simply, "even if everything else burns again." She didn't argue. Coulter found it the next day. He didn't say anything, just laid his hand over it for a long while, as though anchoring it to the timber. And through it all, Micah grew, not in leaps or bounds, but in little ways. He smiled easier, walked straighter. He recognized Evelyn and Sadie and Sam and Eli without hesitation. But most of all, he sought out Coulter. Every morning, every night, every time he was scared or tired or just wanted to be held. And Coulter, once unsure of what to do with such fragile, trusting affection, now gathered the boy up without pause, arms strong and steady, as if this was what his life had always been meant to carry. Then came the rider. It was the third morning of thaw. The snow had begun to recede from the hills, leaving behind a wet stink of mud and melting pine. Coulter was in the field with Eli, setting up new fencing around the creek bend when he heard the hooves. Not fast, not panicked, just steady. Too steady. He turned. The rider came from the north trail. Alone. No das cloth. No sadlibak. Just a black coat and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Coulter reached for the rifle leaning against the fence. "Stay here," he told Eli, then mounted the low ridge to meet the stranger. The rider stopped 30 paces out. Didn't dismount. Didn't smile. Just tipped his hat. "Coulter Hayes. That's me. Got a message for you." "From who?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded note. Threw it in the dirt between them, then turned and rode away. Coulter waited until the rider was gone from sight before retrieving the note. He opened it with slow, deliberate fingers. The handwriting was familiar. So was the tone. It read, "Your fire won't keep the wolves out. You're not the only one who knows how to build fences." Bear. Coulter crushed the paper in his fist. Rourke wasn't finished. And worse, he wasn't alone. That night, Coulter called a meeting at the cabin table. No fire burning, just lamplight and quiet resolve. He laid the note in the center. No one touched it. Evelyn read it once, then folded it again and slid it aside. Sam leaned forward. "What do we do?" "We prepare," Coulter said. Eli clenched his fists. "We fight, only if we have to." Sadie's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't want to run again." Coulter looked at them, at all of them, and felt the full weight of what had become his. "You won't." And they didn't. The next week passed in a haze of labor. They reinforced the cabin windows with wooden slats and iron nails, dug shallow trenches near the edge of the field, mounted a bell above the porch, its rope trailing inside, so it could be pulled in an instant. Coulter didn't sleep more than a few hours each night. Evelyn tried to make him rest, but he shook his head each time. "They come at dawn or dusk," he said. "Always do." But no attack came. Not yet. Instead, Rourke's pressure arrived in other ways. The merchant in Clearwater stopped delivering grain. "Backed up," he claimed, but Coulter saw the lie in his eyes. The farrier refused to replace a cracked horseshoe. "Too much trouble to ride out there," he muttered, though he owed Coulter 3 favors. Even the church went silent. Brent Rourke hadn't returned with guns. He returned with influence. The isolation grew. The ranch became a world unto itself. Safe, yes, but also stranded. And for a while, Coulter feared the pressure would crack them. But it didn't. It hardened them. Sam began trapping rabbits in the woods, returning proud and flushed each time with enough meat to stretch through the week. Sadie taught herself how to mend coats and boots. Eli took to boiling herbs and mixing poultices for scratches and bruises. Evelyn preserved every scrap of food she could find, root cellar packed tight with jars, tins, dried roots. Even Micah learned to help. Carrying wood, dragging blankets, handing nails to Coulter with stubby fingers and a proud grin. They weren't just surviving. They were becoming something Rourke hadn't planned for. Resilient, whole, unbreakable. Then one morning, as Coulter walked the northern fence line, he saw smoke again. Not on their land, but close. Too close. He followed it through the brush, past the ridge where the old trail ran. And what he found made him go still. A camp. Tents. Horses. Men. 8 by his count. One of them looked up. Rourke. Their eyes met across the distance. No words. Just acknowledgement. Like wolves, sending each other on the wind. Coulter backed away, slow and measured. He didn't run, but he didn't linger. He returned to the cabin and told Evelyn everything. "They're near," he said. "Too near." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "What do we do?" Coulter picked up the rifle. He checked the chamber, then looked at the children, and whispered, "We hold." Because running was no longer an option. Because the word Papa had been spoken in trust. And because this land, scarred though it was, had become sacred through the fire. It would not be taken, not without a fight.